Part 2 of The Christmas Bishop. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Part 2 of The Christmas Bishop by Winifred Kirkland. The river was a splendor of Christmas sunshine. A flurry of snow had lightly powdered the brown sod beneath the double rows of elms. Few people were abroad. Sometimes a little group of children, eyes and feet a-dance, and cheeks nipped red, went tripping past the bishop. Older folk passed with hearty, careless greeting, for the stooping figure in the cape overcoat was as familiar and unnoted as the river itself with all its mystery of light. The bishop had known Westbury so long and so well that he felt that the homes by which he was passing, all bright with holly, were his homes, that he might have stopped anywhere to share the Christmasing. His slowly pacing feet, however, were bent on the old way toward St. John's Rectory. In the old days, the bishop had always called at the rectory to greet Barty Judge and his household before church time, and he still kept to the habit, even though it was so different now at the rectory. A flock of sparrows came swooping down through the wintry silence with much chatter, and at the same time there came scudding across the street a little Italian newsboy as shrill and brown as the birds. The bishop bought a paper and made the youngster's smile flash as he paused for a few words in his own tongue. Presently, as he went on, the newspaper dropped from the bishop's fingers as he fell to thinking of that alien colony down there below, where the river curved. Westbury's strangers. They had come so recently, the factories had sprung up so quickly, that the workers were still the strangers. It is true that the bishop was well known to those teeming streets as the old man who spoke Italian and who loved babies, but he felt that he had done nothing for these others really. 80 years! How barren of accomplishment they looked beneath the searchlight of Christmas! But perhaps there was still time. His step quickened. As the bishop passed beneath the shadow of St. John's Church, the chimes clanged forth the 10 o'clock hour. He glanced toward the door, thinking how calm and gentle and familiar everything was within. After all, his headache had melted away, and nothing was to prevent his presence by the altar on this morning. The quiet of the chancel was restful to his fancy, lying beyond the visit immediately before him. As he turned up the rectory steps, tugging slightly on the handrail, the door was flung open, and a tall boy came hurrying out. His thin, fine face was set and black, but a smile played across its frown when he saw the bishop. "Good morning, Harry," said the visitor, "and good Christmas." "There'll be no good Christmas here," answered the low, taut voice, "unless you've brought it, Bishop." "No trouble here today, I hope?" "Trouble every day now." Then, remembering dignity, Harry shut his lips, adding more calmly, "Father is not well this morning, Bishop. I am just going out to tell Mr. Edgerton that he does not feel able to be at church." "Oh, I'm very sorry." "Well, I'm sorry, too. Sorry for Mother and Lois. I am glad you've come. It will do them good to see you." "And may I see your father, too?" "I think so, if you wish it." "I shouldn't wish it," Harry murmured darkly as he turned about to unlock the door he had slammed, calling in a low note of warning to his mother, and then leaving the bishop with her in the drawing-room. The shades had been pulled down, the holly wreaths looked dull. A little mouse of a girl came out of a shadowy corner, and the mother's arm went about the child's shoulders as the two greeted the bishop. They both had thin, dark faces and intense brown eyes. The girl's hair was dusky, and the mother's silver, above a forehead worn but unwrinkled. The girl's dress was white, and the mother's clinging gray, and both wore sprays of blood-red holly. "Christmas joy to you both," smiled the bishop. "And happy Christmas to you too, Bishop," said the mother, while Lois took his hat and cane. He tugged helplessly at his overcoat, so that they each sprang to pull at a sleeve. "Oh, thank you. There, don't let yourself be 80, Lois. It's a sad thing to be older than your overcoat." Then, seating himself, he continued, "Harry tells me his father is not well today. I'm very sorry. I have been worried lately about him." "Oh, we've all been worried. It is hard to understand, I suppose." Mrs. Newbold smiled wanly. "It is just another case of ministerial nerves, but he suffers very much at times. I wish I could shield him from all worry, but I cannot always anticipate what is going to disturb him. We try, the children and I, but I fear we are very stupid. This morning, for instance—" She broke off. "This morning he felt quite unequal to the Christmas service, yet he is worried at not being there." "Egerton and I will manage the service. Dr. Newbold may be quite at ease about that. I hope—" A summoning bell from above rang sharply. Mrs. Newbold started. Oh, Katie is at church," she exclaimed. "Run, Lois." "Oh, no, I'll go myself." With fingers upon the portière, however, she paused. The bishop rose, an odd little flicker in his eyes. "Suppose I go," he said, moving toward the hall. The wife looked at him, fighting for a tremulous smile. "There is nothing the matter, really, of course. I shouldn't let you go up. I know I ought to go, but—" She drew quick breath, concluding, "He's in the study, Bishop." Once again, as earlier in the day, the bishop paused before a closed door. An instant he stood there, hesitant, with bowed head, deeply thoughtful. Then he knocked with firm hand. "Come in, of course," a voice thundered. "Why else should I ring except for you to come in?" The bishop was standing quietly in the doorway. At sight of him, the bulky form flung upon the couch sprang up. I beg your pardon. I thought it was the maid, or my wife." "It is merely your bishop." The bishop's quiet length sank into a deep chair. His long, slim hands rested calmly upon the leather arms. Dr. Newbold sat bolt upright upon the couch, darting furtive glances at the bishop from eyes too blue for his reddened face. His right hand, strong and square, clutched a cushion tensely. The nervous twitching of his lips redeemed from heaviness a face clean shaven, but always bearing the blue-black shadow of a heavy growth of beard. There was a pleasant sweep of brow beneath jet hair. "I am sorry you find me so upset this morning, Bishop. They perhaps told you downstairs—" Then he paused, remembering what they might well have told the bishop downstairs. "Harry told me you were ill. I met him going out." "I judged that he had gone out. Harry's sole comment on his father's headaches is slamming the front door." "The youngsters know so little about headaches," answered the bishop. "That is the trouble, then, this morning? Headache?" "The headache is constant, back here, incessant. But this morning the trouble is a case of everything, as the doctor says." "What does the doctor say? We must find some way of setting straight this case of everything." "What they all say: nerves, rest, less work, less worry, fewer diocesan committees, fewer dinner parties. In Westbury, where dining is a cult, and as venerable and as sacred as the church steeple. I might as well toss over one as the other. Suppose I did turn heretic and refuse Mrs. Hollister's invitation for Thursday. Could I preach beneath her withering glances next Sunday? Or suppose I gave up my bridge with my senior warden. The church needs more card-playing clergy, he says quite frankly, and I'm inclined to think, Bishop, that it does. A little more humoring of men of our good warden's type, and perhaps Dr. Judd's experiences would be less often repeated. Doctors and dinners, be what they will," mockery and worry both played about the heavy, flexible lips, "I have the unfortunate close of that vectorate ever before me." "You forget," said the bishop's voice, low and keen. There was a tiny fleck of red upon his cheekbones. Dr. Judd's forced resignation had been a matter of disagreement between the congregation of St. John's and the bishop. There was perhaps no connection between the action of the vestry and the fact that Dr. Newbold, immediately called to the parish, had been for years a friend of the senior warden, and a prominent co-worker with him in diocesan affairs. The wires of diocesan politics sometimes presented a strange network for feet like the bishop's. The bishop was silent a moment, for the rector's hand, lying square upon the cushion, had recalled to him the days when he had sometimes involuntarily closed his eyes against the sight of his young secretary's fingernails. It was an exquisitely kept hand nowadays, yet one that looked unhealthily inactive rather than sleek. "Well," mused the bishop at last, "if one can't cut out any of these social obligations, how about the committees?" Pity for the quick start and the flush of hurt pride made him add instantly, "Not that the committees can spare you. The church needs you, and we should only be sparing you for a little while to save you for bigger service afterwards." "I should regret," replied Dr. Newbold firmly, while glancing down in some embarrassment, "withdrawing from any service to the diocese just now." "Why just now?" The rector lifted his lids for a quick glance, then dropped his eyes again to his uneasy foot. "The affairs of the diocese, as well as those of the church at large, are passing through a critical period." "Sufficient to justify the loss of your health?" "I feel that the diocese needs me, Bishop." "It needs us all." "Particularly now," repeated the rector. A curious subtlety crossed the cameo clearness of the bishop's face. "But do you not feel that perhaps the need for your activity might be even greater later on?" "You mean," Newbold faltered, for simple folk like the bishop were hard to fathom sometimes, even after 20 years of study. The bishop's smile showed disarming. "I mean simply, lad, if I may call you that sometimes on Christmas Day, that the diocese can't afford to have you break down. It needs and will need you too much for that. Therefore, let the diocese take care of itself a little while." "It's been doing that too long," the other broke forth with the brutality of overwrought nerves. A shadow passed over the bishop's clear gray face. Quick words caught with odd puckering upon his lips. He leaned his silver head against the high, dark chair back, long silent. "Is it really so bad as that, Newbold?" he asked at last. "What is it that is wrong?" "Our finances, for one thing. The treasurer's last report." "There must be finances, I suppose." The other smiled his cynical, twitching smile. "If there's to be a church at all, there must be finances." He spoke with the irritation belonging to many a former discussion. The bishop's inscrutable gaze rested long upon the rector. "You are thinking, and rightly, that I am saved much because I have good laborers in the field to count the sheaves and the shekels. Believe me, Newbold, I know the value of your work to the diocese, and I am sorry for the weariness of it." The other's face cleared in still uneasy relief. "I do not feel that I can withdraw from any office in the diocese, in the church, however small my service." "It is not small. You are the most prominent man in the diocese, the most active, the most influential." The other flushed with pleasure, yet regarded his guest enigmatically. "These are cheering words, Bishop, for a day like this, of discouragement and of pain." His hand went to the throbbing disc at the back of his neck, as he added abruptly, "If what you say is true, Bishop, I am perhaps paying the price." "I am afraid," answered the bishop gently, "that you are." "One doesn't expect the strings to snap at 45, Newbold said querulously. "I could have swung a sledge once. I could still. Yet it makes me wonder. I've wondered lately, what is the secret of your vitality, Bishop?" The flicker of a smile on the bishop's lips. "Yet I had thought, Newbold, that you did not think so highly of my vitality, that you thought it an ebbing flood a year or two ago." The other flushed to the brow. "It was for your own sake, Bishop, to save you the wear and tear of constant travel, constant work, that I urged upon the convention the election of a coadjutor." "I wish you had done it not merely for my sake, but for the sake of the diocese and of the church." "It was for that, too," Newbold murmured. "It was, at any rate, not for my own sake that I refused to have an assistant," the bishop went on. "If I could have trusted the choice of my clergy, it is easy and natural to choose the most popular, the most prominent. A bishop's diocese is dearer than perhaps any one of his clergy can understand. It is my little piece of God's world. It is my Westbury at large. And my ways are the old ways. My assistance might have been the new." He paused a moment, chin in hand, then looked up quickly. "What are the new ways?" he asked, "for I suppose my successor will introduce them." Newbold warmed instantly, moistening his twitching lips. "The ways, first of all, of economical administration. The Church must show itself a good business if we want businessmen to respect it." "Do we? Do we not?" Nervous lightnings leaped to Newbold's eyes. "These are not days of sentimental idealism, of faiths that float in air. Today a man wants to see his money's worth in the Church as well as out of it. The Church," he brought a tense fist down upon the cushion, "has become a business proposition." The bishop's face was intent on Newbold, yet inward and remote. Then the blue eyes smiled. "Oh, but not in Westbury," he pleaded. "We are not money mad in Westbury." "Because you have so much money, have always had. Yet the purse strings are the heartstrings in Westbury as elsewhere. Instance, my vestry in the Southside Mission closed 3 weeks ago. Westbury is wealthy, but not wasteful. The mission was unsuccessful, and therefore to be eliminated from the items of our expenditure. The need of St. John's economical organization is merely an example of the needs of the diocese and of the Church at large. I think I was officially told of the action of the Church in closing the mission." The rector stirred uneasily, then looked up with boyish directness. "I was remiss, Bishop, and I acknowledge it. But I knew the matter would need full explanation for you, and to be frank, I've postponed a good many things of late, simply because I felt paralyzed before them. I'm all out of sorts, not myself at all. I can't tell what's the matter with me." The bishop, noting the sudden hysterical flabbiness of the whole face, recalled the man to firm thought. "The mission is permanently closed, then? That seems to me sad news for Christmas morning." "Believe me, Bishop, I understand your feeling about it. I, too, regret the closing of the mission. I've positively enjoyed my work down there." "I should think that you might have found the mission work almost restful after the other sort." "It was restful, strangely. They speak out down there, act out, too. The South Side caused me no night-long guessing like my neighbors here, yet I had no time for the mission, and lately no money either, for the work has become unpopular, quite naturally." "Naturally?" "I mean the factories and the foreigners have obscured the native population for whom the mission was organized. Social conditions were different a few years ago. It was perfectly possible then for prominent members of St. John's to work at the mission and yet preserve all the decencies of class distinction. The Church would hardly expect a man of my senior warden's type to organize clubs and classes for his own factory hands. Yet might not Christianity expect it? In these days, Bishop, I fear Christianity and the Church are two totally different propositions. You have not lost your power of frankness, Newbold." A sudden shadow dropped over Newbold's face. "Have I not?" he questioned himself darkly, then louder. "With you, Bishop, it is always curiously hard not to say what one thinks. Yet I don't wish you to misunderstand me. I seem to want to be understood this morning, and you're the only person in the universe, I believe, who'd take the trouble. It's not, then, that I don't myself believe the principles of the Christian religion." A smile, infinitely sad and subtle, passed over the bishop's lips. "Since you are a minister of the gospel," he said gently, "one might hope that you believe it." "I have come to believe a good bit of it." "To believe enough, lad?" The Christmas bells had begun again. The voices of the churchgoers sounded on the clear air, but the Christmas visitors sat unheeding. The rector's voice was rasped with the tension of self-defense. Unfortunately for his health and happiness, a minister of the gospel has much more to think about than what he believes. He has to think what his own congregation is going to allow him to say and to do. He has to think what the church at large is going to allow him to say and to do. He has to think of the success of his own parish, and of the church, and of himself. All three must please the public or fail. Now, my policy— Yes, the bishop commented quietly, your policy, a man of growing influence like yours, would naturally have outlined for himself his creed and his conduct. My conduct, assuredly, yes. It has been my endeavor ever since I entered the priesthood, and will always be my aim, to establish respect for the church and its clergy in the community and in the world at large. And by what methods? The same that prevail in other organizations, sound business system, and the establishment of social dignity. We can't expect our young men to be attracted to the ministry unless we can show them something in it worth getting. They naturally want to get out of it reputation, success, social recognition, as in other professions. You have found those things yourself? The bishop's tone was half comment, half question. Yes, answered Snewbold, straightening. I believe I can say that I have found those things. I started at least without them, as you must well remember. I was a raw enough youngster when I first came to you in Westbury. It is humorous to recall. He laughed a sharp, nervous laugh, then grew instantly grave. I didn't have much in those days, but I did have health. Yes, the bishop answered, you did have— He paused oddly. Health. I suppose, if the term had not been so much abused, that I might truthfully call myself a self-made man. The church has done much for me. I am grateful, with reservations. That is why I feel that in spite of these diabolic nerves of mine, I must go on, must serve the church, the diocese in its need. Yet you feel, asked the bishop wistfully, that you cannot serve the Southside mission? Sharp sagacity instantly controlled Newbold's garrulous nerves. That was a principle of simple common sense, such as might well be applied to other die-away mission chapels in many a parish. Very low, the other voice, and far away, yet the poor are to have the gospel preached to them. The parent church is open to them, Newbold answered almost with petulance, here as elsewhere. You mean, the tone was strange, that it might be your policy to close other missions in other churches throughout the diocese? It would be my policy, replied Newbold, setting his heavy jaw, to cut off all waste until we get our diocesan treasury out of debt. The church's one foundation, he added with that daring cynicism that delighted St. John's in his sermons, is at present sound finance. It was a buffet across the bishop's face, making Newbold instantly protest, "Oh, it's not the mere money. It is the deep unpopularity of such missions as the Southside, with such congregations as St. John's. Am I to go against my vestry and retain my position? Am I to be a Dr. Judd? You are afraid." "Afraid? Impossible, for a man of my make-up." He smiled in honest amusement, wetting his lips. "I merely have the sense not to become voluntarily unpopular. What can a man do in the face of unpopularity? His hands are tied, he is helpless." The room and the man before him sank like a picture curtained from the bishop's sight. With wide, strange eyes he saw another picture. He was unconscious of his words. His hands were tied in the face of unpopularity, yet he preached the gospel to the poor, and to the rich, to the poor rich. There was a long, uncomfortable silence, during which the bishop rested his head against the chair-back, waxen eyelids closed. Newbold studied the silent, sculptured face so long that at last, for pure uneasiness, he faltered, "I own, Bishop, that I am no idealist." The bishop opened far, clear eyes. "What are you?" There was a long pause. Then, still in that far, clear voice, speaking quite to himself, the bishop said, Yet you will be. The room, embrowned, closed against the Christmas sun, dusky with many books, held the two men who faced each other as once in a lifetime men may. The bishop completed his own sentence, "You will be my successor." It was quite silent now, for the bells had ceased, and the chat of churchgoers. The chancel of St. John's was only a stone's throw from the chair where the bishop sat, yet it was far from him, the chancel with its peace. But he could still get to church, although late, in time for the communion. One more Christmas sacrament was before him, if only he could hold his brain clear and his body taut, through 1 short hour more, against the sudden blurring pain in his head. The silence of the study still quivered with the bishop's last words, "My successor." Newbold sat facing the fact never before so clearly stated by anyone, not even by himself, but clear to him now as the goal of his clumsy, forceful youth, of his anxious, successful ministry, a goal almost near enough now to touch, perhaps. He could not take his eyes from the bishop's face, transparent as porcelain, now turned into a mask impenetrable. "I would not be your choice, Bishop." The straight line of the bishop's lips formed a quiet "no." "And likely enough I may be nobody else's choice either, in spite of services rendered." Then querulous before that intent gray face that gave no sign, "It's small odds what happens with this head of mine, yet I have served and would gladly serve." "God?" The bishop lifted level eyes. Newbold's thick lips formed for a quick reply, worked oddly, then were oddly dumb a moment before they twisted into a cynic curve from the large teeth. "Harry spoke to me with some frankness this morning. He had just left me when you came, Bishop. A different visitor, it seemed to me. A curious Christmas, verily, if you too, like all the rest, think strange things of me." "Strange things, are they not true?" A rush of anger had swept the color to the bishop's cheeks and shot lightnings to his eyes. The years had fallen from his face like a veil snatched aside. Yet with a torrent of words upon his tongue, the bishop, looking at Newbold, turned silent. There are some men to whom the sight of one who cringes before a blow deserved is humiliating to their own inmost manhood. The sight of Newbold seated there, from his bowed brute head, with its two blue watching eyes, to his big foot that never ceased to tap the rug raspingly, had caused the bishop a recoil for which he hated himself. Yet his anger was just. The Christ himself had cried out against the hypocrite, against commercialism in spiritual places. The bishop, of fine, frail fibre as he was himself, remembered the charm for him of the youthful Newbold's provincial crudity and heartiness. But now, the bishop thought bitterly, if one wished to make a minister of the gospel, one had better take a gentleman to start with. He had trusted Newbold at the first, as he might have trusted a son. He had forced himself to trust him afterwards, until this very day. Yet the bishop now acknowledged that he had known well enough whose influence was at work in the diocese against his own, why certain motions he had desired were tabled in the convention, or if passed, only half-heartedly carried out. How hard the bishop had fought not to be aware of a growing evil undercurrent in the spirit of diocesan work. He was far too sensitive not to have felt, as he talked with some of his prominent clergy and laity, his own great simple enthusiasm fall like a baffled flood against a politely concealed embarrassment he refused to understand. But he had understood. He knew now that he had. Oh, there were powers of evil, militant against the faith, the work to which he had given his life. He had tried not to see them, to believe each man good, especially this man. Yet in this moment it seemed to him that this Newbold seated there was the very cause of all of this dark Judas spirit that everywhere throughout the diocese mocked the loveliness of Christ within his very church. Again denunciation trembled like a lash, then again was restrained because of a certain dignity in the soul gazing so grimly from the bright blue eyes, testing the bishop. It was a face the bishop had loved, and it was haggard as a face in a fever picture. With all the power of vision innate in him, the bishop saw the facts of his failure. This was the man with whom, more than with any other, he had sought to share his service and his soul. They wore both of them the badge of God's ministry. They were both of them the stewards of Christ's mysteries. They sat now, after 20 years of friendship, two men girt in by 4 brief walls, yet far apart as two who do not speak each other's tongue. The bishop's brow grew tense at the hard thought that it must have been all his own fault. He had walked, as he had thought, beside the Christ, the friend, yet a man close to him as Newbold had perceived in the bishop himself no reflection of that beauty. Oh, it could not be! Newbold must understand. For the very loneliness of it, the bishop's face grew all wistfulness, as if a child, lost on a city street, should lift its face to a stranger, hungry for kinship. But for all his seeking, the bishop could not find the lad Newbold in the face before him, grown steel tense with scrutiny. There was worse than this, too, as the bishop looked clear-eyed on his failure. He must one day leave to this man his Westbury, if not, as chance and choice might direct, his diocese. It had been the bishop's comfort to believe, sensitive as he had been to the great currents of unrest and indifference in the world at large, that Westbury had remained exquisitely old-fashioned. Yet it was by the will of the congregation of St. John's that the Southside mission had been closed, the mission the bishop had seen their fathers found, with free outpouring of themselves and their purses. Had the Westbury of today grown Judas jealous of squandering both self and money? The bishop must one day go forth from Westbury, leaving it, nothing, and whose could be the fault but his own? And his failure with Newbold, his failure with Westbury, they were but typical of the failure of his work at large. Of all the gifts of mystery that God gives to man, surely the greatest is the mystery of failure. Wisdom inscrutable that commands work, yet enjoins failure. Mystery of mysteries, that a burning love for that love incarnate born at Bethlehem could not break through the flesh to solace a world athirst. The bishop had loved, yet he had failed to serve. He did not even know how to give peace, as from a chalice, to this harried soul before him. The worn gray face, intent, gave small clue to the thoughts within. Always Newbold watched, waiting for a word. Which way would it swing, that word? His soul also was poised, waiting. The bishop bowed his head upon his hand. He had never felt so utterly alone. Involuntarily, from sheer force of habit belonging to all his moments of unbearable solitude, the bishop's thought turned to the friend. He had always understood. Would he understand now, despair at failure to God's trust? Suddenly the bishop's eyes opened wide and strange. He saw a storm-scourged hill, a mob. Understand failure? What man had ever loved like the Nazarene? What man had ever failed in such transcendent loneliness? The room fell quiet as a sanctuary. Awed with understanding, the bishop closed his eyes to be alone. His thought said, "All other things he has shared with me. He shares also this." Quiet, long quiet, that at last grew a throb with pulses, so many the mountains of transfiguration, and at the bottom always the tumult and the faithlessness. The mental habit of many years steadied the bishop as he drew slowly back to the actual. When some sorrow of his own grew too poignant to be borne, he always forced himself to go forth to the person nearest at hand, compelling his mind to the other's affairs. Such effort, although at first it might be so perfunctory that he was ashamed, ended in full sincerity. Too tired to speak now, he smiled over to Newbold his old sunny smile, meaning that all was well between them. End of Part 2.